Hello and welcome to Module 2 in our Django series. This module is going to focus on apps and views. We're going to divide it into two parts. In the first part, we'll focus on function-based views. And in the second part of this module, we'll focus on class-based views. Let's begin with what is an app. You've definitely worked with many apps, and as you know, each app does something. What is a project? In the context of Django, a project consists of the configuration for the project as well as the apps. And there could be many apps within a single project, and each of these apps can be reused in many different projects. For the purposes of our series, we're going to have just one app within our project. How does app creation begin in Django? To answer that question, let's go to our command prompt and change directory to our virtual environment. Don't forget, we need to activate the virtual environment, right? So now we need to get into our container folder. And remember the last time we learned about Django admin, which gives us this list of subcommands. And among them, you can see Start App. That's what we're going to use. But as I mentioned in the last session, anything administrative to do with our project, we will use manage.py, right? So we are in the folder that contains manage.py. Just type in py, manage.py, start app, and give your app a name. I'm just going to call that school app. Press enter. And now if you type in dir to see the listing, you see the school app directory created there. If you change directory to that app directory, then you see a set of files put in, right? And you can see there the dunder init dunder.py indicating to Python that this too is a package folder. Now get back to the virtual environment. So cd twice should take you there, and type in code space dot to start VS Code from this point. So we have the Explorer there, our virtual environment, the container, right? We have our package folder for the project, and then we have our app as well. And if you look down the list of files, you can see we have a file called views.py, right? We'll come to that shortly. But now that we've created the app, we need to next talk about views. We'll talk about how we design URLs for our views. We'll also talk about the URL configuration and of course the URL patterns. So let's begin with views. What is a view? And if you recall, in the last session, I mentioned a view is a Python callback function. Remember also that the view is concerned with processing a user request and returning a response. Both request and response should be of the HTTP type. What kind of response would a view return? And we know it's an HTTP response from what I just said, but the response could be anything from an image to a web page with its HTML contents. It could be a 404 indicating there's no such URL or the page is not found. It could even be an XML file. Where would we store the code for the views? And by convention, the code would reside in views.py. Now let's talk about the end goal of a view. A view can essentially have just one of two outcomes. So either the view will return an HTTP response object, or it will raise an exception like a 404, meaning page not found. Looking at a sample view now, let's understand the code. In the first statement, we are importing HTTP response, which is essentially a class that is imported from the Django.http module. Remember, the class is the blueprint or the template on the basis of which objects are created. The next statement, we are importing datetime, and this is from the Python library. right? The next statement defines our function, the def indicating it's a function-based view. And then, of course, the argument going in is the HTTP request object, right? So this would be an instance of the HTTP request class. In the next statement, we are assigning to DT, that's just a variable, the output of datetime.datetime.now. Now, if you're familiar with Python, then you know that this is going to put the current date and time into this variable, right? In the next statement, we are formatting the date using these directives. The next statement, we have this little template. As you can see, we have the HTML opening and closing tags as well as the body tags, right? So all we're doing here is printing out that formatted date. This statement is important as we are returning HTML, right, which is this variable, and that's our HTTP response object. Just a bit about datetime. These are all the directives we can use. We've used %d, %b, and %y. More information can be found at this link, which you will also find in the description of this video, right? So now let's go ahead and write our views. And we start with a very simple view. So get into views.py. And let's start by defining our view. Let's call that index. And that's going to take in our HTTP request object. And all we're doing here is returning our HTTP response object, which is going to be a simple string. Now we have a squiggly here, and that's because we need to import HTTP response from Django.http. Right? So that's our first view. Okay, now what happens next? So every view, in order to be displayed, requires a URL configuration. But what is a URL configuration? Again, this is Python code, which will essentially map your URL patterns to your views. So how does Django process a request? Django first determines the root URL configuration module. How does it do that? If you go into your settings file, that's the project settings file, you will see we have a setting for the root URL configuration, right? And that's our project URLs. Django loads that module. Then we'll look for the variable URL patterns. Run through each URL pattern, stop at the first one that represents the requested URL, and then of course Django will import and call the given view function. Now how this all works together will become clear to you when we put in some more code, right? So let's go back now to our app directory. And if you look down the list, you see that we do not have a urls.py file. And so we need to create it. So right click and then click new file and type in urls or urls.py. Now the first statement that we need to put in here, you can straight away copy from the project urls.py file, and that is this one. Right, so Control C, and we'll talk about path after we copy that statement here. So what is path? The path function takes 4 arguments. Of these 4, the root and the view are mandatory. These 2 are optional. So let's look at these arguments in a little more detail. We have 4 arguments. The root argument is essentially the string that contains the URL pattern. Then we have the view, and this is essentially the view function that will be called. We have keyword arguments, and we can send arguments to the view using a Python dictionary. And then we have the name that we can use to refer to this view in our templates. Using path, therefore, what we are doing is we're going to define our URL configuration. Looking now at a sample URL configuration, we import path and we also need to import the views. The dot representing the current directory, the app directory. Then we create our URL patterns variable and put in the different paths or the different patterns within a list, right? So the first one there, giving the root, the view to call, that's the view function, and the name to use in the template. Note that we don't have any keyword arguments here. That is optional. The second path, we have the root, and here we are using angle brackets so that we can pass a keyword argument as part of that root argument. Then we have the view function to be called and the name to be used in the template. Similarly, you have one more pattern there. You have the root argument, again using angle brackets to pass in a keyword argument as part of the root. And then we have the view function to call and the name to be used in the template. As I said, URL patterns need to be put within a list. How Django processes the request is it goes through all these URL patterns and then stops at the one that satisfies the request. And then, of course, we'll import and run that view function. Okay. Now let's go and create our own URL configuration. So going back to our code now, we'll put in here URL patterns equal to, and of course that's going to be in list format. So here we'll have path and we'll put in home / comma, and that will be views dot. Now I should see the names of the views here. That's how VS Code works, but because I haven't imported the views, I cannot see them. So from dot, again that means the current directory, which is the app directory, import views, right? So now when I type in that dot, I should see the views, right? So the index view, name equal to home. That's the name we can use in templates. We have only one view for now, so that's our URL configuration. What's the next step? We now need to point the root URL configuration at our app URLs module. And so to do that, we go to our project urls.py file. Now the first thing we need to do is to import include. What does include do? Well, first let's put in our path here, and this is going to specify our app name / and then comma include, and then within quotes put in the name of the app .urls. So when Django encounters an include, what it will do is it will essentially cut off whatever matches up to this point and then send the rest of the URL pattern to the included URLs, right? And again, this will become clearer when we run our project now. To do that, we need to run the server. We need to first make sure that we are within the container folder, right? So that we have access to manage.py and then type in py manage.py run server. So now let's go to our browser and type in localhost 8000 / the name of the app / the root we specified for the view. So that's home / press enter and you will see your message. So now to understand again what happens when Django encounters include, Django essentially will chop off the URL until it matches. So it's this part. So if we look at our URL, it'll chop off until here, right? So this part, and send this part to the included URLs, right? So control then goes to our app urls.py file. And there, of course, we have a match. And so this view is called and we have a message displayed. So I hope that's clear. Let's go ahead and write another view. We're going to call that date and time. And again, that takes an HTTP request object. And here we'll have dt equal to datetime dot now. And again, we have a squiggly because we've got to import datetime. And here we'll say fdate or formatted date equal to dt.strftime, putting in the format. So again, we're going to use %d hyphen %b hyphen %y, right? And then formatted time equal to dt.strftime. And we're going to use %H, %M, and %S. This is a 24-hour clock essentially. Then we'll create our little template, right? So I'm going to call it equal to, and here we have our HTML tag followed by a body tag. Now you can see a squiggly there, and that's because it needs to be in quotes. Okay. We'll have a paragraph tag as well. Then we say today's date, %S. We'll have 2 break tags. So we get 2 blank lines. And then we have the current time is %S, right? And then of course we need to close all tags. So we close the paragraph tag, the body tag, and the HTML tag. Close quotes, right? Then we follow this by % and the variables f_dt that will map to this %s, comma, f_time. Okay, return HTTP response, and that will be tmplet. Okay. Now, of course, we've got to wire this view, if you will, into our URL configuration. So come to your app urls.py file, put in a comma there. That's important because if you don't put in a comma, you have an error, as you can see, right? So put in a comma and put in the root. So we're going to say here date time / comma views dot date and time, comma name equal to date time, right? Do we need to do anything in the project URLs file? No, because we've already said include all the app URLs, right? So we don't need to do anything here. We can straight away go to our browser, and instead of putting in home there, we'll put in date time. Press enter. So I hope that's clear. To reiterate again how the include function works, remember it's going to chop off this part and then send this remaining part to our app URL configuration for processing. Then we'll run down this list, find a match, call our view function, and display it. Right? So that finishes part 1 of our module 2. In the next session, like I said, we'll talk about class-based views and also view decorators. Till then, take care. Bye.